Chapter 4. To Rise to Dust.
If you are successful, your father will be returned to you. Should you fail, however, he will be executed. Did I make myself clear, May?
She nodded. What other choice did she have? If she refused, they would kill him anyway, so she had to. For the life of her father. The berserker opposite of her bared his sickly yellow teeth in a wide grin.
Great. We'll be looking forward to hearing from you.
He stood up and reached with a hand for her cheek. She swatted it to the side and glared at the Viking. Touch me, and you lose those fingers. A low growl escaped his throat before he turned around and stormed out of the house. Kuroma May sighed and shrunk in her sitting position. Putting her face in her hands, she took a deep breath before groaning in frustration. Then she picked up the bottle of sake that sat underneath the table at her side, unseen by everyone, poured some of it into a little bowl, and drank it in one swift motion. The alcohol flowed down her throat, and she enjoyed the taste of it, if just for the shortest of moments. In a fit of rage that followed her joy over the sake, she threw the bottle against the wall, the clay shattering in a loud noise. She put her elbows on the table and pressed her face in her hands. The sound of the door to the room sliding open made her head shoot up again. Are they back to torment her even further? But it was only a servant girl, followed by May's husband. Mistress, said the maid, bowing, and made her way to the wall to clean up the pieces of clay and the sake flowing down. May sighed again and put her face back in her hand, shaking her head. My love, what is troubling you? As she looked up, she saw his worried look on his face, breaking her heart even more. Her family wasn't a typical samurai family. May, as the wife, was the warrior, a kensei of exceptional skill with the blade. She was the one answering to the daimyo, making invitations, attending the meetings of other generals, and training troops. Her husband stayed at home, tending to their daughter and keeping an eye out to keep their house in order. She loved him dearly, and seeing him troubled on her behalf made her even more hopeless. But nonetheless, she had to wear at least some kind of mask to ease him, if only for a bit. Just another worry about the war. Horkos is further trying to destabilize the Mire to gain a foothold, and Chimera tries to strengthen their positions here. Just another battle lost or won. You know, the giving and gaining. He shook his head. This whole war is just pointless in my eyes. She knew that he didn't see anything good in warfare, and this war had raged on for too long. Don't worry, dear. All wars can end at any day. You know that. Besides, none of the factions, nor Horkos or Chimera, can fight forever. At some point, they have to make peace. Even though I am going to fuel the hatred and effort each side puts in this war, she thought to herself. Yes, she was going to do something that would plunge this part of the Mire into chaos, and it would create an opportunity for the people that kidnapped her father. They put a sword's edge to his throat, threatening to kill him if she didn't obey. When they kidnapped him, her world collapsed. Her mother died years ago whilst defending the city from a Viking raiding party, so her father was the one she held dearest, next to her daughter and husband. She expected them to demand a ransom or something like that. A pile of money that would put her in debt for years, but no. Blackmailing is what they wanted. Her family wasn't wealthy. She had no influence in the court of a daimyo. She was just another samurai warrior. No high station, no privilege, no connections to rise up, but they didn't want her for her non-existent station or money. They wanted her as an expendable pawn, cannon fodder for their plans. She stood up. "Excuse me, my dear. I have to attend a meeting. The daimyo has sent for us. Do not wait with dinner for me. It will be late." Her husband nodded. May then picked up her nadachi, placed it on her shoulder, and stepped out of the house. In front of her stood a blooming sakura tree. The petals slowly fell to the ground in a twirling motion, covering the grass underneath their soft and light pink bodies. She stood there, just looking at the tree. It was an old tree, gnarly and twisted, but still blooming year after year. She didn't know when it was planted. "Back when tigers still smoked pipe," her father used to say when she asked him about it. Her father had held her position before her, a general of no great deeds, but respected nonetheless. Now she was a general, carried his armor and weapons. He was old, frail, and sick. And now he got kidnapped, threatened with his death if his daughter disobeys. If his daughter disobeys or fails. He certainly would tell her not to do it. Loyalty and honor are a samurai's biggest virtues, and to disregard them for love would be foolish. But is she not the head of this family? The warrior, the guardian of her kin? Isn't it her duty to protect them, even if it means taking the lives of others and even putting her own on the line? That was at least part of her oath of loyalty. To protect the mire, its citizens, and everything in this province with her life. She reached a conclusion. She wasn't even sure when she started making her way towards it, but here she was. She bowed deep before the old tree, before making her way through the city to the estate of a daimyo. It was noon, the streets a vibrant buzzing of people, animals, and colors. Everyone was doing his day's work, driving, selling, buying, protecting. But despite them being occupied with whatever they did to survive the harsh nature of the mire, all of them stopped and bowed before her, making her way if needed. She was a samurai, a very honored member of society, and thus she could demand this. From time to time she stopped and looked at some products just to continue on her way without buying anything. It was a simple attempt at distracting her, but it was also fruitless. Eventually she reached the gate to the estate of a daimyo. Two massive Shugoki guards stood on each side of the wooden gate, their faces hidden by masks in the shape of oni, each a kanabo in their hand. Before they could stop her, she pulled out a small wooden tablet with characters written on it. With a grunt, the guards let her pass. They pushed the gates open, and she entered the grounds that formed the home of a daimyo. As soon as she set foot on one of the stepping stones that show a path on the neatly cared for sand before her, a young servant girl rushed towards her before bowing deep as soon as she reached May. "Lady Koroma, please follow me. Lord Blackthorn asks for everyone to be seated in the garden." With a simple nod, May signaled the girl to show her the way, and she followed. Old and twisted trees stood beside young and straight ones, creating a bizarre but somehow welcoming scene. She was led through a room with no furniture, but all sorts of trinkets on the walls. Scrolls written in Japanese and Latin, a tanto and katana on one side of the room, and a dachi opposite of it, and above the two doors on each side of the room hang a banner. One for the family of the daimyo, and one for his former legion. So stupid, she thought to herself. He is a daimyo of the mire now. Why is he still clinging to his old legion? but she kept moving. As she left the room with the servant girl, they entered a garden that was set in an Ashfaldian style. Grass and flowers grew here. May was astounded how he managed to arrange this outlandish garden in the Maya of all places. As she looked around, she noticed that a wooden wall that surrounded the estate seemed to be shorter than at the gate. There were a number of guards stationed in the garden at the moment, but surely that was only due to the meeting being held here. A bit of a way into the garden, a table was set up. 7 plates and cups were put up, 3 on each long side and a single one on the short end. Apparently her daimyo wanted to treat his warriors well and serve food and drinks. "Ah, May, I'm glad you're here. Come, sit down." His voice was smooth but firm, even with his foreign accent and slightly broken Japanese. As she turned around, he stood before her, tall and imposing in his heavy lawbringer armor. Richard Blackthorne, the Black Dragon. She felt her palms flood with sweat and her body stiffened. "My lord," she muttered and bowed deep. Her gloves began to turn damp with sweat. Her gloves began to turn damp with sweat, and she despised the feeling. It reminded her of her weakness, and that was a train of thought she couldn't use at this moment. The deep voice of Blackthorne disrupted her thoughts. Now, May Gosen. Come, sit down and drink with me until the others arrive." He walked over to the long table, his Ashfaldian armor clanking constantly, a sound that unnerved May even more. But she did her best to not break. She had stood fast under much greater pressure, and she would stand fast now. For her father. So she sat down, picked up a cup of tea, and drank. The Black Dragon took one, too, but waited until she put hers down again. "So, May, tell me, is there any news from your part of my province? Oh, and how is your father? Is he still as strong of a warrior as when I met him?" Her hands clenched around the small porcelain cup, and she felt pearls of ice-cold sweat run down the skin of her back under her armor. How could he know? Did he know? If yes, who told him? No, he couldn't know. He's just being nice. No need to worry. No need. Just keep calm and play nice. She put the cup down and folded her hands in her lap, pressing them together as hard as possible without hurting herself too much. He is fine, still strong and loud-mouthed like the old times. Blackthorne's chuckle caught her a bit off guard. "Ah, yes. Not so foul-mouthed like some of the bandits, but not as well-spoken as other samurai. I remember that old badger." May began to press her teeth together until her jaw muscles began to burn. She picked her cup up again and began to turn it in her palm, occasionally taking a sip from it. "May, you seem a bit tense. Are you okay?" She took a deep breath to answer, but before she could open her mouth, a servant opened the door to the house and announced new guests. "My lord, Minohobu Subayashi has arrived." Against all customs of the mire, Blackthorne rose and greeted the large samurai with open arms. The big man, a shogoki, bowed as deep as his belly allowed. May herself rose, making way for Subayashi to take his place next to the daimyo. He was the greatest general, so this place was his by right. Both of them bowed shortly to each other, and May took a designated place further down the table. From that point forward, May kept out of conversations. The warriors of Daimyo Blackthorne trickled in one after another, until every last one of them had a seat and a cup of tea. And one after the other, presented his support of the last 3 months of his part of the province, and the black dragon listened. From time to time, servants came out to refill empty teacups or bring out food. It was hours upon hours of reports of skirmishes or the harvest or the war in general. Miyoshi, the general seated to her right, finished his report and took a swig of tea. For a moment it was completely silent until May realized it was her turn to speak. She scrambled for words, stumbling over her own tongue. "I'm sorry, my lord." And she began her report. It was nothing too outlandish, just practice words she just heard, like she wasn't even speaking herself. Just well-known words rambled down. But she herself wasn't really there. While she was reciting these trained words, she fought a battle within herself. Richard Blackthorn, her daimyo. Everyone knew the legend of how he single-handedly defeated a village from a Hawk's invasion, armed with steel and fire like a dragon, destined for greatness. And now she, a warrior of little renown, if any, was supposed to slay this legendary figure, with treachery nonetheless. Her desperation turned into embarrassment, and then into even more hate. Hate towards herself for even considering it. Hate towards her father for getting captured. And hate towards the disgusting berserker and his whole ilk. And fueled by this hatred, she snapped back as if she had left her own body to ponder. She grabbed the edge of the table while she finished her report. As the next of them started to talk, her hold tightened, and she felt the sting of a splinter burrowing into her ring finger. The pain grounded her again, pulled her back from her thoughts. She tried to focus on the tasks she had ahead of her. The assassination of her daimyo. The rest of the meeting was stale, in her opinion. Food, tea, and wine was brought, but she wasn't hungry, nor was she thrilled to drink right now. As soon as she could, she left the estate, addressing Blackthorn only with a bow as she moved from the table. The same girl that had shown her the way in led her outside again. Back on the streets, she took a deep breath and then made her way home. The shallow breathing of her husband and daughter and the slight rustling of the leaves outside were the only sounds. The room was dark, only shades of grey. As silently as possible, May arose from her bed and walked out of the room, careful not to step on the nightingale floor that was meant to warn them if someone sneaked in. Ever so slowly she opened the door to her dressing room and slipped in. With fast and practiced motions, she put on grey clothing and strapped a leather strap around her shoulder on which the saya of her nodachi was fastened. Lastly, she pulled out an old mask that showed the visage of a fierce Samoni. It was carved out of wood and painted with black and gold. 2 horns were on top, and the big teeth formed a gruesome grin. It was a family heirloom, passed down from generation to generation over hundreds of years. And now it would protect her, or so she hoped. Just then the irony came to her. The face of a demon that should protect her on a mission of dishonor. A bittersweet smile played on her lips as she finally hid a tanto in her clothing. She wasn't planning on using her nodachi. It was too big to wield effectively in the halls of the estate. But should she find herself in need of defending her hide, she'd prefer this big sword over a small tanto. For one more moment, she just sat there, completely still, just breathing, gathering her thoughts and steeling her mind and body for the task ahead of her. When she felt ready, she rose and began her way towards the estate of Richard Blackthorn. The streets were empty, a stark contrast to the bustling life she witnessed earlier that day. She did her best to keep out of the light of the few lanterns. Her steps were strong, filled with rage and determination. Focused on a goal, and due to her slightly impaired vision of the mask, she noticed the movement almost too late. It was a fox, with deep red fur and bright white chin and throat. May froze. The fox locked eyes with her, and she could swear they weren't the usual brown, but light blue, and they looked almost intelligent. After a few seconds, the fox let loose a loud bark that startled her more than it had a right to before it walked off. "Kitsune," May whispered, more to the wind than herself. She stood there for one more minute before her body listened again to her, and she continued to walk towards the estate. She walked the way she knew, but before she'd come in sight of the guards, she turned right into the dark underbrush of the woods, right next to the town. It took a few minutes before her eyes grew accustomed themselves to the lower light conditions. A good while later, she reached the wall that surrounded the garden of Blackthorn's home. May hesitated for a moment. She still had the option to turn around, to keep her honor, and to save the life of a kind and mighty person. But the moment she thought about it, she remembered why she was doing this. And her heart wouldn't allow her to let anything happen to her father. She took a deep breath before beginning to scale the wall. It was hard, and she made little way with a lot of effort, her fingers and toes searching for the tiniest of holes to stem her up the wall. After a good while, she had scaled up and sat atop the shingles that crowned the wall. For one more moment she paused to catch her breath before she continued. It was crucial that she wasn't too exhausted. Her breath had to be controlled, her steps had to be precise. She couldn't allow herself any mistakes. After she had gathered her breath and thoughts, she climbed down the wall, dropping the last meter down into the soft grass. Slightly crouched, she sneaked to the house, slid the door open, and stepped inside. For a few heartbeats she remained still to listen for any guards that could be on patrol. As she heard nothing, she slowly and carefully made her way towards the sleeping quarters of Richard Blackthorn. She moved slow and carefully, but the dread of being discovered made her hands, feet, and even her whole body tremble from time to time. With each step, doubts began to grow in her head, and with each growing doubt, her movements grew more and more erratic. One step, one made too fast, or one wrong hand placement could give her away, and she knew that. Through some miracle, she managed to avoid the nightingale parts of the floor that would tell everyone in the estate that she was there. Now she stood in the half-open door to the chamber of the Black Dragon. There he was, the famous Ashvalian that turned daimyo in the wake of an overwhelming Holocaust invasion. May had heard the stories of him, breathing fire upon his enemies and striking them with such strength they practically burst on the impact of his poleaxe. But she had also seen him fight when a neighboring daimyo tried to take some villages from him. He was strong, that was true, but he didn't spit fire. And she had the advantage of surprise on her side. She tried to stabilize her movements again, to regain control of her body, but failed. Adrenaline now rushed through her body, and all she could hear was the blood in her ears that sounded like a raging ocean. She took a few deep breaths before truly stepping into the room. She drew the tanto. The blade sliding against the small scabbard sounded painfully loud. Slowly she crept ever closer to the sleeping man. But before she could raise the knife, she heard it, and it sounded so painfully loud to her heightened senses. The high wail of the nightingale floor, and beneath this noise the rattling of chains before a foot struck her in the side of her face. She staggered and fell. Her warrior nature kicked in, and in a nearly fluid motion she rolled to maintain at least a bit of balance but an odachi strapped across her back hindered her movement so that she stopped on her hands and knees instead of her feet. In a panic and with adrenaline rushing through her body, she jumped on her feet and drew the nodachi as fast as possible. She got a good grip on the sword just in time to block the two sickles that reached for her shoulders from above, seemingly coming out of the shadows itself. With a quick reaction, she pushed them aside before storming towards Blackthorn, who was about to rise from his bed, already brandishing a dagger. But before she could reach the confused man, another kick struck her, this time from below. The wooden oni mask lessened much of the impact, but the teeth of the lower jaw still clacked against the opposite. May stumbled again. As she regained her balance for the second time, she now saw her attacker. It was a woman clad in blue-gray and red clothing, brandishing two kusarigama at her, sickles in hand and the chains wrapped around her arms. Even though her face was hidden by a mask, May recognized her. It was Kimiko, the shinobi woman Richard had taken for his wife. With a frantic look around, May saw the dragon was now rushing for his weapon. Panic struck again, and she moved to flee. But she didn't make more than 6 steps before she felt a blinding pain in her left calf that cut through the fog of the adrenaline. With a cry, she stumbled a third time, but this time she didn't fall. Her legs, though, couldn't carry her weight anymore. Escape was out of the question. Spinning around as fast as possible, May brandished her sword at the two foes across from her. The black dragon had nothing but his nightgown and his giant paw legs, while his wife was fully fitted for combat. May wanted to check her leg, wanted to know what had hit her, but she knew that she would be dead once she lowered her guard. Like this, she still got a chance of killing her daimyo, no matter how slim it was. Before combat could arouse again, however, she heard the sound of heavy footfalls behind her, and spun around just in time to raise her nodachi in defense to a strike of a heavy kanabo. With the sickening sound of breaking steel and splintering wood, the handle of May's sword broke in half upon the impact of the club, and she herself was knocked to the ground again, her injured leg giving out under her and the weight of the swing. The next thing she felt was a heavy foot on her chest, pressing her to the ground and hindering her from standing up. "Bring him away," she heard the deep and seemingly still asleep voice of Blackthorn. The next day, she knelt in the backyard. Richard, his wife, and 2 Shugoki guards opposite of her. She didn't dare to lift her head, so great was her shame. Her eyes were glued to the ground before her, counting the dusty white pebbles right in front of her in a futile attempt to calm her thoughts. 10. Almost lost now. 23. Her father was about to die. 39. Her family was disgraced. 46. Her husband and daughter. Kuroma May, you are here to answer for your crime of treason. The black dragon had now risen from his pillow. May raised her head to look at him. He looked stronger and more imposing in his heavy armor. An armor as strong, as impenetrable as his mind. It looked worn, but it was polished and cared for enough to shine a bit in the light. They locked eyes for a moment, and she saw rage, disdain, and was that pity? Blackthorn took a few steps forward before he turned to one of his Shugoki guards. "Leave us." The large man bowed and signaled his comrade to follow him, the floorboards creaking under their weight. Kimiko hesitated, but when Richard turned around and looked at her, she too quietly bowed and walked away. To this day, May still hears the rattling of these chains in the quietest of moments. Blackthorn walked over to where she was kneeling on the ground. May hesitated for a moment, but then she decided to bow before him, her forehead touching the surprisingly warm stones. She remained like this, feeling her body trembling more with each second that the silence lasted on. Her head began to spin. There were no questions, no fear, not even thoughts. It just spun and spun in an endless circle, and each second felt more and more like an eternity. Finally, her daimyo relieved her. Sit, May. Don't kneel. Sit. His voice was stoic and sounded harsh, but she couldn't help but notice something in his tone, but she couldn't place it. Without hesitation, she sat, her legs folded in front of her. Richard stood in front of her, tall and broad, his black armor having the imposing effect that it undoubtedly was meant to have. It clicked and clattered as he sat down, still imposing. Broad and strong, he sat before her like a mountain, unmovable. And yet it gave her a bit of stability. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't hitting or humiliating her. Blackthorn let out a deep sigh. For the first time ever in her life, May saw the legendary man, the Black Dragon, the defender of this province, shrink. I'm no stranger to being a target. Many people have tried assassinating me, and, as you can see and most likely conclude, all of them failed. All of them have their reasons. Money, greed, even madness. He paused for a long moment. May looked at him, and she felt the words fighting in her throat, clawing their way up, trying to open her mouth and escape. They were words of plea and desperation, and they suffocated her. Her throat felt thick and closed, and for a moment she felt like she couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him what happened, that she needed help, that she needed stability. But the moment she was about to open her mouth, her pride swept over her like a flood. No. She humiliated herself too much already. So she kept quiet. Another side escaped Blackthorn, laden with tears and pity. I sent for your father, but neither my messengers nor his servants could find him. So I think you did it for him. Tell me, is he rebelling against me? Involuntarily, her head shot up, her eyes meeting his. No, it's not that. See, I don't know what happened to him. All I know is that you did it for him, and not against me, he said, his voice low and rumbling, but not threatening. She regained her composure and again looked at the stones. My lords, please permit me to die. I dishonored my family and myself. She heard the clank of his hammer, and she felt his heavy hand on her shoulder. No, May. You did this out of love, and mistakes made of love don't deserve to be punished. But I cannot ignore what you did and tried to do. He rose again. You will be stripped of your rank as samurai. This is your punishment. You will be a Ronin, and if there is any forgiveness and redemption, you will have to earn it. Your family will keep their place, and I myself will see that no harm is done to them. Your daughter will have your place. She froze at his words. He stripped her completely of her honor. He had denied her a chance to restore her honor in the eyes of her people. He had replaced her with her own daughter, and yet she couldn't quite find the rage she so wanted to have, and she didn't know why. She had always enjoyed walks in the woods surrounding the city, but this walk felt cold and distant. The birds chirped, and it wasn't too cold, but May had lost herself, and with it every warm thing seemed to got sucked out of nature. She didn't know where she was heading. She just knew that she was walking somewhere. She now had a freedom she didn't ask for, and it felt wrong and out of place. Even the Oni mask, which she had held so dearly till the last moment of her old life. She took it in both hands, the distorted face grinning back at her. It was her heirloom. A fit of rage rose inside her, and before she knew what she was doing, she hurled the wooden mask into the woods. She heard a loud thud as it hit something.
Oi! If you throw faces away, at least warn others.
The voice startled May, and she instinctively reached for her nodachi, only to find that she didn't have one. Out of the tree line stepped a man, dressed in simple but vibrantly colored clothing and a white hat. At his hip, 2 katanas slowly swaying in takt with his movements. A light grin on his lips, he threw the mask back at her.
So, you are the new Ronin. Don't worry, I'm here to help. Your daimyo is just, but not cruel. Now, follow me.
He turned around and vanished into the thicket, and May followed in his tracks. So, hi, Cedric here. I normally don't do this after a story, but this time it feels warranted, and I want to do it. Because, as you might have noticed, Richard Blackthorne made an appearance, and not quite a tiny one at that, which actually wasn't my plan. Sorry, English isn't my first language. It wasn't my plan. Yes, I asked RavenKnight if I could use him, and I wanted to use him sparingly, but as I wrote the story, how do I say it, May took over. Like, when I write and I know it's a good story, it's not me writing, it's the character writing. And this is what happened. So, Richard had a bigger part in this than I thought, and than I wanted. And yeah, I communicated this to Raven. I sent him the story beforehand for him to give his okay. And at this point, I want to thank him for this opportunity to work with his OC, with Richard Blackthorne, which I admire his stories and his legend of Richard and anything that is attached to that. And again, I want to thank you so much. It was a real honor to work with you and Blackthorne, and I hope the little changes I did were to your liking. And yeah, so to RavenKnight and all the others, see you in the next chapter.